Hello, good morning, boys and girls. Today we are going to be reading about a strong and powerful friendship between two famous baseball players, Jackie Robinson and Pee Wee Reese. Jackie Robinson grew up in a time where African Americans were treated very poorly. During this time in the 1940s, Black people were treated as less than. Black people were not allowed to use the same bathroom, schools, water fountains, or any other public facilities as white people could. They had to use separate ones from white people. Black people had to have their own separate public facilities from white people, and they were also a poorer quality. So we are going to watch a short video to give us a nice introduction about who Jackie Robinson was, so we can learn a little bit more about who he was.
We are going to learn about Jackie Robinson. Jackie Robinson, he served in the military. He was an amazing baseball star, and he became an American hero. Let's look at the incredible story of Jackie Robinson. Jackie Robinson was born in 1919 in Georgia. He was the youngest of his siblings and was very athletic. As a young man, he served in the Army. He was not treated well in the Army because of his race. Many people treated African Americans poorly and were unfair to him. After the Army, Jackie Robinson began playing professional baseball. Baseball leagues back then were segregated. Segregated means separated by race. Jackie played so well, the major leagues took notice, and later Jackie Robinson became the first African American in modern Major League Baseball. It was amazing. Jackie Robinson played his first game for the Dodgers in 1947. Now, many people were angry about Jackie Robinson playing in the Major League. Many wanted to keep the leagues segregated or separated by race. Jackie Robinson knew segregation was not fair. He did not let them stop him. He stayed positive. He never fought back. He never lost his temper. And he showed that you can do the right thing and stand by your beliefs. He focused on his game, and he became one of the best baseball players of all time. He never gave up and showed why players should all play together, regardless of their race. In 1962, Jackie Robinson was inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame, commemorating all that he did for baseball and the great baseball player he was, even when things were tough. Jackie Robinson, he served in our military. He was a baseball star, one of the best baseball players ever, and he became an American hero and showed that we are better when we work together than when we are separated. Thanks so much for watching this video on Jackie Robinson.
Alrighty, boys and girls, so that gave us a wonderful introduction on who Jackie Robinson was and some of the things that he had to go through. So after watching that video, boys and girls, what words would you use to describe Jackie Robinson? Yeah, brave, friendly, strong, talented, and athletic. Those are all some wonderful words and definitely do describe Jackie Robinson perfectly. So why do you think Jackie Robinson kept playing baseball even when people were violent towards him? So in the video it talked about that a lot of people were angry that he was playing baseball. Why do you think he kept going despite all those people being angry? Yeah, because he was brave, because he wanted to make a difference, and because he loved baseball. Those are all really great answers. So why do you think Jackie Robinson did not fight back when people yelled at him? So the video talked a little bit about even though people were so angry towards him, he didn't fight back when they were violent or yelling or making mean comments to him. And what impact do you think that made? since he didn't fight back, what kind of impact do you think he made on those people by not saying anything at all? Yeah, Kyle? Yeah, he didn't want to make people more angry. That's exactly why he didn't fight back. He didn't want to fight fire with fire. Yep. And he knew it would not help him. Right, exactly. He knew that it was just going to make things worse, right? It would make people more angry and just get them more riled up. And then, yeah, Kayla, that's also a great answer. So people were surprised. So you were talking about like the impact that his silence made, and people were surprised that he didn't fight back and that he showed that he was the bigger person, and he didn't give those mean people the power that they were wanting, and did not give them that acknowledgement. Awesome. So class, before we begin our shared reading about our teammate story, we're going to review some academic language that we are going to find throughout our story. So some of the academic language can be difficult words to talk about. So we are going to be respectful as we define these difficult terms and as we see them in our reading. So our terms are going to be segregation, apathetic, prejudice, Ku Klux Klan, creed, self-control, intimidate, savior, humiliate, hostility, shortstop, petition, provoke, and sought. So these are all the words that we are going to see throughout our reading today. And as we go, we're going to go and we're going to define them as well. And we're going to talk about what each of those words mean as we go into our reading and as they come up. So, boys and girls, now we are going to start our reading. So you want to make sure you have your own reading out in front of you so you can follow along as I read, and we're going to go through the text by chunks. So we're going to start with the first chunk, and we're going to start at page 85. So I'm going to share my screen so you can see that as well. All right, so we have our first page here. And then this is just the introduction. So Jackie Robinson was more than just my teammate. He had a tremendous amount of talent, ability, and dedication. Jackie set a standard for future generations of baseball players. He was a winner. Jackie Robinson was also a man. So this was a quote from Pee Wee Reese from October 31st, 1989. So now we can start our reading. Once upon a time in America, when automobiles were black and looked like tanks and laundry was white and hung on clotheslines to dry, there were two wonderful baseball leagues that no longer exist. They were called the Negro Leagues. The Negro Leagues had extraordinary players, and adoring fans came to see them wherever they played. They were heroes, but players in the Negro Leagues didn't make much money, and their lives on the road were hard. Laws against segregation didn't exist in the 1940s. In many places in this country, Black people were not allowed to go to the same schools and churches as white people. They couldn't sit in the front of the bus or trolley car. They couldn't drink from the same drinking fountains that white people drink from. Back then, many hotels didn't rent rooms to Black people, so the Negro League players slept in their cars. Many towns had no restaurants that would serve them, so they often had to eat meals that they could buy and carry with them. Life was very difficult for the players in the major leagues. Life was very different for the players in the major leagues. They were the leagues for white players compared to the Negro Leagues players. White players were very well paid. They stayed in good hotels and ate in fine restaurants. Their pictures were put on baseball cards, and the best players became famous all over the world. Many Americans knew that racial prejudice was wrong, but few dared to challenge openly the way things were, and many people were apathetic about racial problems. Some feared that it could be dangerous to object vigilante groups like the Ku Klux Klan reacted violently against those who tried to change the way blacks were treated. The general manager of the Brooklyn Dodgers baseball team was a man by the name of Branch Rickey. He was not afraid of change. He wanted to treat the Dodger fans to the best players he could find, regardless of the color of their skin. He thought segregation was unfair and wanted to give everyone, regardless of race or creed, an opportunity to compete equally on ball fields across America. So that's where we're going to stop for our first chunk. So we read a little bit and got a little bit more information. So we're going to go over some of the academic language that we saw while we read. So one word that we saw, segregation, which we also saw in the introduction video that we watched, but I want to define it for you now too. So segregation is to separate or isolate from others. So in the 1940s, Black people were segregated from white people. Apathetic, having or showing little or no interest, concern, or emotion. Prejudice, a judgment, opinion, or attitude directed towards certain people based on who they are or how they look. So there was prejudice against Black people during the 1940s. Ku Klux Klan was a secret and violent hate group against Black people, Muslims, Jews, Catholics, and foreign-born individuals and other groups as well. And creed, a statement of basic beliefs of a religious faith. So now I'm going to ask a comprehension question. So name some of the difficulties the member of the Negro Leagues endured. So can anyone answer some of the answer that question for me? Yeah, wonderful. They had to sleep in their cars, right? Because hotels, most hotels would not rent to them. Sam? Yeah, because many restaurants would not serve to them. They would have to bring their own food and carry it as they go. Anyone else? And yeah, they were very underpaid compared to the white players in the major leagues. Wonderful. And then let's ask another question. So who was Branch Rickey and what was his opinion on segregation on the baseball leagues? Yep, Branch Rickey was the baseball coach. And yes, he did think segregation was unfair, and he wanted to give every player a fair chance, no matter what race they were. Wonderful, yeah. So he was looking for the best players. That was great, wonderful. So to summarize what we just read, so during the 1940s, segregation separated Black citizens from white citizens. Water fountains, schools, churches, and all other public facilities had to be separated by white and Black designated areas. Black people were not allowed to use the same water fountain as white people, and baseball leagues during this time were also segregated. But one coach, Coach Branch Rickey, did not agree with this. This coach wanted to give his fans the best players possible, regardless of race. So now we're going to continue on, and we're going to continue to read. So Branch Rickey launched a search, to do this, the Dodgers needed one special man. Branch Rickey launched a search for him. He was looking for a star player in the Negro Leagues who would be able to compete successfully despite threats on his life or attempts to injure him. He would have to possess the self-control not to fight back when opposing players tried to intimidate or hurt him. If this man disgraced himself on the field, Rickey knew his opponents would use it as an excuse to keep Blacks out of the Major League Baseball for many more years. Rickey thought that Jackie Robinson might be just the man. Jackie rode the train to Brooklyn to meet Mr. Rickey. When Mr. Rickey told him, "I want a man with the courage not to fight back," Jackie Robinson replied, "If you take this gamble, I will do my best to perform." They shook hands. Branch Rickey and Jackie Robinson were starting on what would be known in history as the Great Experiment. The spring training with the Dodgers, Jackie was mobbed by Blacks, young and old, as if he was a savior. He was the first Black player to try out for the Major League team. If he succeeded, they knew others would follow. Initially, life with the Dodgers was for Jackie a series of humiliations. The players on his team who came from the South, men who had been taught to avoid Black people since childhood, moved to another table whenever he sat down next to them. Many opposing players were cruel to him, calling him nasty names from their dugouts. A few tried to hurt him with their spiked shoes. Pitchers aimed at his head, and he received threats on his life, both from individuals and from organizations like the Ku Klux Klan. All right, boys and girls, so we're going to stop there for our second check, and we're going to go over some of the academic language that we saw. So some words that we saw self-control, which is to slow down and think through one's actions. Another one is intimidate, to frighten or scare, especially by threats. And savior is someone who saves someone or something from danger. And then humiliate is also another word, which is to cause someone to feel embarrassed or ashamed. So now I'm going to ask you questions, some questions about what we read. So how did other players react to playing with Jackie Robinson after he joined the Dodgers? Yep, some of the other players avoided him, right? And moved tables if he sat next to them. And then, other players from opposing teams were really mean to him and tried to hurt him, like with the spiked shoes. Wonderful. Another question, what kind of player was Ricky looking for? So what was he looking for in a player? Yeah, he wanted a player who could handle all the mean threats and all the mean words. And he wanted somebody perfect. He wanted somebody that wouldn't fight back, who could handle the unfair treatment and have self-control. Wonderful. Then to summarize what we read in that section, so Ricky was looking for a player who could take the humiliation, threats, and harsh words. The coach knew that the player he chose had to have self-control and would need to stay calm despite all the hate. The way the player would react to the hate would impact the future of Black players to come. Eventually, Jackie Robinson was chosen, and he promised to do his best to perform. Jackie Robinson made history when he became the first Black player to try out for the major league team, and Robinson made the team. But the battle had just begun from there, and he had to now deal from hatred from not only fans, but also teammates and opposing teams. So now we're going to continue on with our reading. So despite all the difficulties, Jackie Robinson didn't give up. He made the Brooklyn Dodgers team, but making the Dodgers was only the beginning. Jackie had to face abuse and hostility throughout the season from April through September. His worst pain was inside. Often he felt very alone. On the road, he had to live by himself because only the white players were allowed in the hotels in towns where the team played. The whole time, Pee Wee Reese, the Dodgers shortstop, was growing up in Louisville, Kentucky. He had rarely even seen a Black person unless it was in the back of a bus. Most of his friends and relatives hated the idea of his playing on the same field as a Black man. In addition, Pee Wee Reese had more to lose than the other players when Jackie joined the team. Jackie had been a shortstop, and everyone thought that Jackie would take Pee Wee's job. Lesser men might have felt anger towards Jackie, but Pee Wee was different. He told himself, if he's good enough to take my job, he deserves it. When his Southern teammates circulated a petition to throw Jackie off the team and asked him to sign it, Pee Wee responded, I don't care if this man is black, blue, or striped, and refused to sign. He can play, and he can help us win, he told the others. That's what counts. So now, boys and girls, we're going to stop there and go over some of the academic language that we saw. So we saw hostility, to be unfriendly. We saw shortstop, which is a baseball infielder whose position is between second and third base. And then petition, a request to get something done. So now our comprehension questions. So how did Jackie Robinson feel after joining the Dodgers? Yeah, he felt sad. He felt alone, and he felt humiliated. Yeah, those were all great ones. All right, another one. Who was Pee Wee Reese? Yep, Pee Wee Reese was a baseball player for the Dodgers. Yep, he was a shortstop from the Dodgers. That's great, even more specific. And yeah, he was a supporter of Jackie Robinson. He supported him being on his team. So to summarize what we read, so after Jackie Robinson made the team, he felt very isolated. He kept his pain inside, and he felt unwanted and alone. Jackie Robinson was a shortstop, and Pee Wee Reese was also a shortstop. Most people were upset that Robinson was joining the team, and he would possibly be chosen over Reese. So even though most people thought Reese would be upset by Robinson, he wasn't. Reese had no hatred towards Robinson, and he told others that if Robinson was a better player, then he deserved the spot in the game. Reese grew up in a place where segregation was normal, but he didn't care what race Robinson was and had no desire to take him off the team, unlike the other players did. So now we can continue on and read. Very early in the season, the Dodgers traveled west to Ohio to play the Cincinnati Reds. Cincinnati is near Pee Wee's hometown of Louisville. The Reds played in a small ballpark where the fans sat close to the field. The players could almost feel the breath of the fans on the backs of their necks. Many who came that day screamed terrible, hateful things at Jackie when the Dodgers were on the field. More than anything else, Pee Wee Reese believed in doing what was right. When he heard the fans yelling at Jackie, Pee Wee decided to take a stand. With his head high, Pee Wee walked directly from his shortstop position to where Jackie was playing first base. The taunts and shouting of the fans were ringing in Pee Wee's ear. It saddened him because he knew it could have been his friends and neighbors. Pee Wee's legs felt heavy, but he knew what he had to do. As he walked towards Jackie wearing the gray Dodger uniform, he looked into his teammates' bold, pained eyes. The first baseman had done nothing to provoke the hostility, except that he sought to be treated as an equal. Jackie was grim with anger. Pee Wee smiled broadly as he reached Jackie. Jackie smiled back. Stopping beside Jackie, Pee Wee put his arm around Jackie's shoulder. An audible gasp rose up from the crowd when they saw what Pee Wee had done. Then there was silence. Outlined on a sea of green grass stood these two great athletes, one black, one white, both wearing the same team uniform. I am standing by him, Pee Wee Reese said to the world. This man is my teammate. So after reading our last section, we're going to go over our academic language again. So we saw provoke, to bring out an emotion in someone, such as anger, sadness, etc., any kind of emotion. And sought, so we saw it as past tense, is of seek, which means to look for. A comprehension question, so what did Pee Wee Reese do to make the crowd go silent? Yes, he stood up for Jackie Robinson, and yes, he put his hand around, his arm around him and supported his teammate, despite everyone yelling. Another question, why did Pee Wee Reese take a stand? Yeah, he wanted to stand up what was for what was right, yeah. And Tim, yeah, he also, he felt bad for how Jackie Robinson was being treated, and he did just want to take a stand just because he felt sad and he knew it wasn't right, yeah. So to summarize what we read, so Reese believed in doing what was right, and when he saw his teammate in need of help, he stood by his side. Jackie was getting yelled at and was shown kindness by Reese. Reese made the crowd go silent as he simply walked to his teammate with a smile and put his arm around his shoulder. Reese took a stand and showed the crowd that Jackie was just as much a part of the team as any other player. All right, boys and girls, that story was very powerful and is an important part of our history. So let's summarize what we just read all together. So this story was about a black man breaking through segregation and joining a world-famous all-white baseball team. Jackie Robinson was faced with humiliation, threats, bullies, and unfair treatment. Robinson felt isolated from his team, and despite constantly being provoked, he kept his calm demeanor. Robinson knew that the way he reacted would make or break the future of black baseball players to come. Pee Wee Reese, who many expected to be outraged with Robinson's presence, felt quite the opposite. Reese saw the hatred towards Robinson and one day decided to take a stand against it. Reese stood by his teammate and showed a crowd of people that no matter Robinson's race, they were part of the same team. So it was a wonderful and great, powerful story. So boys and girls, after reading the story, I am sure many of you have a lot of thoughts and connections forming, and probably had a lot of that while we were reading this too. So we are now going to get those thoughts written out in a double entry journal. So we will revisit the story, teammates, and pick out important passages or quotes that you will be able to relate to. So for example, I'm going to model some for you. So we're going to go to my double entry journal. So in the book side, you're going to put a quote from something that you read, and then you're going to put your response to it. It can be a reaction, it can be a personal connection, it can be how you personally interpret it, what you thought it meant. So it can be anything like that, about like something that you thought of as you read it, something you connected to. So for me, this first one, I looked at the quote from the reading. I am standing by him, Pee Wee Reese said to the world. This man is my teammate, on page 97. So you want to make sure you include the page number as well, so you can go back and find it easily. And then my response was, I related to this quote because I feel that it is very important to stand up for your teammates. I have had to stand up for one of my peers before, And I really liked, and I personally really like this part in the story because it shows the impact you can make by standing up for what is right. So here in my response, I responded how I personally connected to it. And then I also just said my opinion on it, that I really like this part because of what it stands for. And it shows the impact that one person can have on just standing up for what is right. Another one I did is the taunts and shouting of fans were ringing in Pee-wee's ears. It saddened him because he knew it could have been his friends and neighbors. So I connected this to a time when I saw a girl getting bullied. So even though I didn't know the girl personally, I was saddened about how that they were treating her. And I thought about how I would feel if I was the one being bullied. So here in my response, I connected to that because when I was reading this part in the book, I made this connection and I thought about something that happened in my life. It doesn't have to be exactly the same, but just a way you can connect what you read to something in your life, or maybe a way that you interpreted the text. And then another one, so he would have to possess the self-control not to fight back when opposing players tried to intimidate or hurt him. So in my response, I said I related to this because as I was growing up, my mom always told me that fighting fire with fire never solves any problems. I think it was very important for Jackie Robinson to stay calm so that way people would not retaliate against him even more. So in my response, after I read this section of the book, it made me think of when I was growing up and kind of the thing that my mom would tell me all the time. And then I also wrote down, what I thought and why I thought it was important for Jackie Robinson to stay calm. And then we'll go over one more. So the players could almost feel the breath of the fans on the back of their necks. So this reminded me of when I would attend my brother's baseball games. And again, we would have that same like close-up feeling, and you'd be right there close with the players in the baseball field. And then there's actually one more. And then this last one, this was the quote, his worst pain was inside. So after reading this quote, I made a personal observation, and I found that Jackie Robinson felt so alone, and it was because that he felt that he had to take on the world by himself. So he felt that he was getting a lot of hate and a lot of anger and violent towards himself, and he kind of felt like it was all just on him. There were no other Black baseball players at the time in the major leagues, and at this part in the story, no one had ever stuck up for him. So I made this observation. So you can also make observations in your double entry journal about like what you saw from like a particular part in the book. So I took this quote and I made a personal observation, what I observed while I read it. So now that you've seen me model it, and you saw that I picked my quotes, put them on the left-hand side, and then the right-hand side, I made my responses. Now I'm going to let you boys and girls go ahead and do your own double entry journal, and make sure to include those page numbers, and make sure to make those connections, and you can definitely go back to the text if you need to. All right, boys and girls, now that we have finished our double entry journal, we're going to go over some of the academic language that we saw. So we are going to stop sharing that because we don't need our double entry journal anymore. So we are now going to go over some of the academic language that we saw by doing our performance task sheet. So everyone should have gotten a performance task sheet, and we're gonna go through have some time to go ahead and answer those, and it's just a match. So you read the definition and you match it with the word. So you can go ahead and take time to do that now. All right, boys and girls. So now that we have finished our double entry journals and our performance task sheet, you all did a wonderful job today as we read the story Teammates. During our reading, we learned about the first Black baseball player in the major leagues. We read about all the violence and hateful words he had to endure. Jackie Robinson could not fight back and instead had to stay silent in order to not cause more reason for white men to keep Black players from the major leagues. While Robinson continued to take the crowd's anger, Pee-wee Reese, a white teammate, took a stand. Reese decided it was time to show the crowd that Robinson was no different from himself. Reese stood by his teammate, and in front of the whole world, he said, "This man is my teammate." Reese and Robinson left the crowd speechless, and Robinson was no longer alone. He didn't have that feeling of loneliness anymore. He felt like somebody was standing with him and standing up for him. Through our reading, we also read some new words, such as segregation, to separate or isolate from others, apathetic, having or showing little or no interest, concern, or emotion, prejudice, a judgment, opinion, or attitude directed towards certain people based on who they are or how they look. The Ku Klux Klan, a secret and violent hate group against Black people, Muslims, Jews, Catholics, and foreign-born individuals. Creed, a statement of basic beliefs of a religious faith. Self-control, to slow down and think through one's actions. Intimidate, to frighten or scare, especially by threats. Savior, someone who saves someone or something from danger. Humiliate, to cause someone to feel embarrassed or shamed. Hostility, to be unfriendly. Shortstop, a baseball infielder whose position is between the second and third base. Petition, a request to get something done. Provoke, to bring out an emotion in someone such as anger, sadness, or any other emotion. And sought, the past tense of seek, which means to look for. So finally, after learning about these academic language words and getting to read about Jackie Robinson, we completed a double entry journal. We revisited the text and wrote down what we read on one side of the page, and on the other side of the page, we made personal connections to the text and reacted to what we read and our thoughts about the situation. We all did a great job today, boys and girls, and remember just to turn in your double entry journals and your performance task sheet. So thank you.